arranging the program in a beautiful way so that we all can be updated on what is the recent advances as well as what is required. So many of the things are vague with us, and some are things that things that we have not heard of also. So those are things that we really have to keep in touch with, especially child rights, the trauma that children go through. Some I think so. Those are things that we cannot imagine. So definitely these are things that are an eye opener for all pediatricians, and especially at this point I would like to thank Dr. Ashok Kumar for having planned this week program. Actually, we were actually planning it only for the 2 days that Central IAP had given us this year, that is on 19th and 20th. Then I had put forward the idea to Ashok Kumar sir, because in the previous years we had done this as a week program. So sir said he will get us the speaker. So that is why IAP Kerala decided that we'll go for a week program. So I'm also happy to have all the speakers. I think the first program was a real success for us. And yesterday's was also another nice program. And today having a top gun to give us an idea on the traumas and what are things that we have to keep in mind is also a session that is really to be learned by all of us. So wishing the program all the best, and also the tomorrow we are having a public program that I think so Dr. Ashok Kumar will be talking about. So wishing the program the best and happy learning to each and one of you, and hope we change our mindset and be more careful and more loving to the patients that come to us. Thank you. JAPJ.
Thank you, Dr. Shimi. Dr. Riaz, are you free? Dr. Riaz is in another workshop.
Yeah, he's actually chairing a session. That is what he put a message
okay,
out to me. I think
okay, it's okay. So we will move on to the scientific part. Dr. Ranjit, can you record this program? I think Ranjit has left off. Okay. Unfortunately, the person who was supposed to chair this session was Dr. Venkadeshwaran. He has some, his daughter has admitted, so he is not able to join today. So I take the responsibility of chairing the session. Actually, this is a concept which is not gone into the mindset of many of us, including pediatricians. That is a trauma-informed care. What is trauma-informed care? It is a framework for helping people who has undergone or experienced trauma. Just by recognizing and responding to the effects of trauma, the understanding the impact of the trauma, and avoiding re-traumatizing. That is one important point. And our focus should be shifted from what is wrong with you, that the concept of what is wrong with you, to what happened to you. That is the simple term which we use to highlight trauma-informed care. And to tell us, I'm not the right person to say about that. We have Dr. Sekhar Seshadri, who will be talking about the trauma-informed care. And I don't know how to introduce Dr. Sekhar Seshadri. He is a known person in the pediatric community, and he has conducted a lot of programs. But for the sake of formality, I just say a few words. If I start talking about him, it take another 15-20 minutes. So I just take a few words. He was a former head of the department, senior professor of Department of Adolescent and Pediatric Psychiatry in NIMHANS. After retiring, during that period also, his interest was in child trauma, gender and sexuality issues, life skill education, and his role in POCSO and Juvenile Justice Act issues are very important, and he still is a consultant in the Supreme Court for most of the issues. And after the retirement, I think towards the end of his tenure also, the concept of SAMVA, that is support, advocacy and mental health intervention for children in vulnerable circumstances and distress. And this is a national initiative by NIMHANS also supported, and he's in charge of that. And personally, I have involved in many of these programs. And in fact, IAP is also conducting couple of programs with his help. And we have IAP Violence Against Children program also. Myself and Dr. Sekhar are part of this program. I think he is the right person to say about trauma-informed care. And sir, this field is for you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashok. Thank you, Dr. Shimi, for as well. If I could just request everyone to mute their mics, particularly Dr. Nagalita. Your mic is on. If you could mute yourself, because because there is some disturbance.
I think so. Dr. Ashok
Sir,
can do
I
that.
will do that, sir. I will do this, sir. I am the
Yeah,
host, so I can do that. No
yeah.
problem.
Thank you. Before I get into the substance of trauma informed care, um, I I come from a conviction that all the pediatricians who are present in this evening's session have an awareness of the lives of the children that they so ably assist. I'm saying this because what does trauma actually mean for a child? And what experience constitutes trauma? On the one hand, we have the very serious, the very intense, the very horrific things that children endure and experience. But if you look at the whole list of what are traumatic situations, not just for children, but for any human being, whether it is natural disasters or man made disasters or accidents or terminal illness or loss or death and dying or bullying or abuse of different natures, whether it is witnessing violence, witnessing strife, all this is kind of subsumed under what has been an everlasting epidemic. If COVID was a current pandemic, adverse childhood experiences has been an everlasting epidemic. Neglect, abuse, adverse family circumstances. Therefore, it is not surprising that Mark Twain said, nothing that grieves can be called little. In the eternal laws of proportion, the loss of a doll for a child and the loss of a crown for a king are events of the same magnitude. And therefore, to tell a child, I'll get you another doll. No, that one. Because for a child, the loss of a loved object, whether it is a doll, whether it is a pet, whether it is a loving grandmother, or whether it is a parent, it carries a different valence. Let's delve into this a little deeper. Let's talk about loss, friends. Let's say loss of a parent in a child's life. Now, that child may or may not come to the consulting room of a pediatrician, or may come, perhaps with school refusal, perhaps with a child who was dry has come with bedwetting, perhaps with somatic complaints, uh, perhaps with eating and feeding problems and weight loss, perhaps with sleeplessness. But you figure out that the physical complaint, the medical complaint that the child has come with is actually in the background of a recent event that has occurred in the child's life. Now, look at the complexity here. In one child, a parent has a diagnosis of cancer, in and out of hospital, surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, metastasis, secondaries, slowly sinking away. The finality of the diagnosis is given that nothing further can be done except for palliative work, and the parent sinks and goes away. Is one kind of story. In another instance, the father is in and out of hospital, a lot of medical care. But in the all neighborhood, the whispers are he used to drink, liver. In yet another instance, in and out of hospitals, and again whispers, HIV, he was not a good man. In another instance, a hale and hearty parent tells the family just going out to get some milk. Half an hour later, the doorbell rings. There are a set of agitated people saying, "Sir, accident," gone like that. So they are all lost experiences. They're all traumatic, but they don't carry the same meaning. And this is exactly what Dr. Ashok meant in this very powerful introductory remark. Uh, when you shift the question from what is wrong with you to what happened to you, and when you and that's the start really of trauma informed care. So with these words of introduction, let me actually read a poem to you to give you an idea, even more nuanced and even more deep, on another kind of trauma, which is that of child abuse. Friends, listen to this. Promises, Promises by Cindy, age 12 years, as reported by her social worker. I asked you for help, and you told me you would if I told you the things my dad did to me. You asked me to trust you, and you made me repeat them to 14 different strangers. I asked you for privacy. You sent two policemen to my school with a black and white car, like I was the one who was being busted. I asked you for help, and you gave me a doctor with cold hands who spread my legs and stared at me just like my father. I asked you for confidentiality, and you let the newspapers get my story. I asked you for protection, and you gave me a social worker who patted my head and called me honey. Do you know what it is like to have more social workers than friends? I asked you for help, and you forced my mum to choose between us. She chose him, of course. She was scared and she had a lot to lose. I had a lot to lose too. The difference is you never told me how much. I asked you to put an end to the abuse. You put an end to my whole family. You took away my nights of hell and gave me days of hell instead. You changed my private nightmare for a very public one. So you see what the lived experience of trauma is for a child. Um, Mohan Deshpande, may I request you to kindly mute your mic?
Yes, he's muted, sir. He's muted.
Thank you.
I will do that. I will.
Thank you. So you see the lived experience, the fabric of the lived experience of a child who actually endures trauma, whatever the nature of trauma may be, and how, as a practicing pediatrician, whether you're doing chamber practice or whether you're in a polyclinic or whether you run your own establishment or whether you're in a medical college, in a large department, uh, whatever your context of operation may be, and whatever symptom the child may come with, how do you really look at the lived experience of a child and the context in which the child's presentation to you actually takes place? If we were to go on this in a little more depth, you look at the kind of impact taking, let's say, child abuse of different natures as a context, and you look at the impact on a child survivor, and if you look at physical effects, whether they are wounds caused by physical abuse or if the child has been sexually abused and has contracted a sexually transmitted disease, including perhaps HIV/AIDS, or children who come from a position of neglect and abuse and living conditions that are not conducive to health and actually has tuberculosis. But as pediatricians, you would be aware of this, that kids who are abused for long periods of time or who have been victims of trafficking, as another example, from a young age, are actually shorter than the average height. They're underweight. They are slow in both physical and intellectual development. One of the most recent expositions on this is called the Romanian Adoption Study. Sir Michael Rutter, world famous child psychiatrist of UK, he passed away a while ago. When the dictator regime of Nicolae Ceausescu fell in Romania and the forces sort of moved in to look at the status, and they went into childcare institutions, they found a number of children with severe forms of malnutrition, neglect, stunted growth, even impacted and compromised cognitive growth. And many of them, through an international treaty, were actually shifted to UK and put in institutions where good care was given, and their anthropometry and in other growth parameters was studied. And this was Michael Rutter's famous Romanian adoption studies of how a change in the environment and provision of stimulation, care, attachment experiences, and trauma informed care actually corrected the kind of slowness that had been caused in the physical and intellectual development because of long periods of incarceration and other traumatic experiences of institutionalization. If you look at psychological effects, whether it is post-traumatic stress disorder with intense feelings of anxiety, fear, and isolation, whether it's self-harm behaviors, or whether it is kids who actually have hostile, angry, and aggressive behaviors or high-risk behaviors, but issues of identity and selfhood itself, low self-esteem and self-doubt, feelings of guilt, but more than anything else, a deep and a worrying lack of trust in the adult world, in the social systems. And then, if you look at social effects, what happens when children are actually experience separation and alienation from family members? Dr. Ashok, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you now.
Okay. I think there was some problem with the. So I was just talking about the impact, the social effects of their inability to fit with peer groups in establishing relationships and worries about reintegration into society when a child has experienced trauma and is attempting to survive the trauma and move on in life. So, as practitioners, as chamber pediatricians or academic pediatricians, whenever you want to start with trauma-informed care, there are certain key elements of interviewing which is necessary to keep in mind. I would like you to remember, friends, that for a traumatized child, for an abused child, a known enemy is better than an unknown friend, particularly because often experiences like trafficking and abuse is done with the complicity of the family and known people. So trust becomes a very difficult issue for these kind of children. And sometimes it's assumed that the child knows who you are and what your role is. But this assumption may not always be correct. So it's important to be clear on, for the child to be clear on who you are and what your role will be in helping the child. Because as I said, when they're trafficked, let's say by family or abused by known persons, they're unable to trust new people. Going further in this process of your connection and contact with the child is allowing the child the time and space to provide narratives on her or his experiences and feelings and respond with empathy and how difficult it must have been. And I'll tell you why this takes place. You know, if you take a child who has been from who has been rescued from trafficking and has endured abuse for 4 months' time, 6 months' time, 8 months' time, and then through a child welfare committee order placed in a childcare institution. But the child has not resolved the trauma and what the child has endured in those several months. And the child is either aggressive or weepy, and the staff of the institution often come up with a response to say, "You've been rescued, isn't it? What is the problem now? Why are you withdrawn? Why are you weepy? Why are you so irritable?" But if you really understand what the experience of a child, for example, who's been trafficked with the complicity of the family, either for child labor, ill treated, injuries, medical issues, rescued, child welfare committee order placed, and then because of medical reason, then brought to a pediatrician. Or a child who's been trafficked for sex work, having to endure multiple clients over a day, perhaps having reproductive tract infections or even STDs. And some treatment is done, but there are residual health issues which then comes to the attention of a pediatrician. How do you respond with empathy on the difficult experiences that the child may have undergone? And if you know how much the child has been through, the complete powerlessness and lack of agency, it would be easy to understand why hostile and angry responses are natural and understandable, considering the extent of the trauma experience. So, children may have aggression, withdrawal, sexualized behaviors. So, no point in blaming the child or judging him or her for such behaviors. So, all your inquiries in the above techniques of interviewing should be based on allowing the child's story to emerge. This is trauma informed care. You'll get more details and information that way. You will use close ended questions only for details. So, to exercise circumspection and a certain quietness, never coercing or hurrying the child to speak, becomes very important in trauma informed care. Moving ahead, let's look at a framework. So, we started with trauma in general, disaster, loss, death, dying, accidents, disfigurement, terminal illness, and so on. And from there, we moved into abuse. And from abuse, we're looking at one context of abuse, which is through, let's say, trafficking. Now, what happens is there is raid, there is rescue, there is repatriation, reintegration, rehabilitation, and redressal. So there's police raid, rescued, you repatriate uh, either to temporary shelter and try to reintegrate with family if available, if willing. And then there are return to education or depending on the age, skill building, job placement. And then there are compensation schemes, of the government and so on. But what this framework for intervention actually misses is reclamation. Reclamation of personhood, and reclamation of affirmative sexuality. Identity and the fragmentation of identity, loss of control over their lives, over choices, over agency, and how do you restore and how do you allow them to reclaim that sense of mastery and agency, control, and choice over their lives? That becomes the fallout of trauma-informed care, where you first allow the child to explain what happened and then allow for this reclamation to take place. At this point of time, when you're initially meeting the child, one must realize that a crisis may occur at any stage, whether it's during rescue or separating the survivor from an abusive situation. So, not necessarily in trafficking, it's an intrafamilial abuse, perhaps a cousin, perhaps an uncle, and there is an issue of reoffending. So the child survivor has to be shifted from the threatening environment. And this creates a family crisis. So the assessment process, when both the child survivor and members of the family need to be subject to careful assessment. So your intervention is really aimed at minimizing the pressure on them, making them feel more physically, emotionally, and socially secure, and helping them to gradually regain some degree of control over the situation. What does this involve? From a medical viewpoint, it's the treatment of injuries, the treatment of diseases, which you will conduct. But it also involves psychological treatment to respond to PTSD, to so-called deviant behavior, to suspiciousness, to outbursts of emotion, aggression, self-harm tendencies, by appropriate referrals to a mental health professional or by a pediatrician who has done additional training in trauma-informed care, which is what we are doing both as part of iCancel as well as the Indian Child Protection Medical Professionals Network, and the initiative that Dr. Ashok alluded to, uh, the, the child abuse prevention initiative that the Indian Academy of Pediatrics has started. But crisis intervention also involves social support by providing a caring and understanding person or family who can render emotional support to the child survivor during assessment and rehabilitation processes. This rehabilitation involves certain basic activities. So, as a practicing pediatrician, you may have a support system or a support network of people who work with you, for you, or who you're associated with, who will foster a healthy relationship with the child through activities to establish positive relations between the child survivor, the peer group, the staff, the opportunity to participate in sports, in recreation, in entertainment. Because what happens with many children who undergo trauma is their lives become circumscribed. If it was trafficking, they were incarcerated. If it's abuse in a family, they stop going to school. They're told not to speak to anyone. There's a whole lot of shame and guilt and anger. So the childhood stops. And in order for reclamation of childhood, the person that the child is to take place, not to trivialize or minimize the trauma of the abuse, but to say, we will deal with it. But you have every right to continue with things that you like to do. And this is also what is a follow up to the basic premise of trauma informed care. All this involves activities aimed at making the child feel secure and self confident and trusting, allowing the child to feel confident in the self while learning to trust others, allowing the child to be convinced that he or she is not isolated because there is someone to talk to who you can relate to, even share secrets. And then the kind of counseling that assists in regaining self-respect and self-esteem that is required. And in the context of trafficking, do we repatriate the child and reintegrate with the family who in fact were party to the trafficking process, or should we actually improve our childcare institutions? So this notion that the family is always the best place for a child to be in needs to be looked at seriously through robust social investigation reports. So one must assess the circumstance of the child, whether it's trafficking, whether it's abuse, whether it's trauma. Who constitutes the family? What is the extent to which the family is involved? Is the family safe for the child? How do you restore the child's agency? Do you take the child's decision into consideration? Would an institution be good? How do you build a rapport between the child and the family through conversations and visits before final repatriation? How does a child respond to questions regarding the absence or travel? So to provide a script for the child, to just to give you an idea, many children will ask, oh, I was trafficked and inducted into sex work. When I go back, people ask me, what do I say? Now, there is no obligation on the child to go into details of how many clients one had to service in a day and how brutal and intolerable the situation was. But the script is, due to certain family limitations, they thought that I could go for work. So I did, in the hope that I would assist the family. I hoped that the situation would be congenial. Unfortunately, it was not, and I did not wish to stay there. But the process of getting back home was not easy. But thanks to the intervention of certain good people, I have managed to come back. Thank you very much for your concern. That's the truth. You're not lying. So you don't have to go into details of the sexualization part of the script. And finally, when you look at the focus of healing and recovery, the reclamation part, whether it is therapy for extreme trauma and PTSD, working through difficult feelings, for which a practicing pediatrician may take the assistance of a psychologist who works with him or her, or refer to a colleague. But it also involves counseling on. And this is something that I have been working on quite actively, learning about personal safety, on happy, healthy, and safe sexual behaviors, on addressing other high-risk behaviors and conduct issues, stress management skills, emotional regulation skills, life education skills, all of which is present in the Samvad website, which I will be putting in the chat after my presentation is over and before we come to Q&A. All these materials are available, and please use them liberally. Let me end the presentation with a brief video that I would like to share.
Our case in part 1 focused on a 9-year-old Nakul who was sexually abused by a known and trusted family member. In this part, we will discuss a case of a child sexual abuse in context of sex trafficking. Let's begin by talking about a 15-year-old girl. I'll call her Amy. Amy's mother died when Amy was 12. Her father remarried soon thereafter. The new stepmother did not like Amy and arranged for her to be sent away to work as a domestic servant. However, in reality, she sold Amy to sex traffickers who held Amy in a brothel in another city. She was subjected to repeated, severe physical and sexual violence thereafter at the hands of traffickers and buyers. When police later raided the brothel, Amy was put in prison and subsequently released back to her trafficker. Before and during her period of trafficking, Amy experienced many traumatic events, ranging from the death of her mother to separation from her father and siblings, to loss of her community, and extensive violence, deprivation, and repeated sexual assault. All of this trauma has changed the way Amy views the world when she was a small child. She likely felt that the world was a safe and predictable place and that the people around her cared about her well-being. Now, she probably sees the world as a very dangerous, unpredictable, hostile place where everyone is intent on exploiting her for their own gain. She once saw herself as a capable older sister who was good at her chores and schoolwork and worthy of a bright future. Now, she sees herself as dirty, bad, helpless, and unworthy. If this is the way Amy perceives things, what should I expect when I'm speaking with her and asking questions? Amy might be very withdrawn, meek, and compliant, reflecting a lack of self-esteem and sense of agency and a desire to avoid being noticed and abused. She may be angry, truculent, and uncooperative, harboring the subconscious view that aggression on her part may prevent aggression on yours. If you are a man, she may behave in a sexually provocative way, believing that this is the only way to communicate with males and that her sexuality is the only worthy part of her being. Trauma may impact Amy in other ways too. Often, severe trauma can lead to physical changes such as headaches and other pain complaints that do not have an apparent medical cause, changes in eating habits, or problems with sleep. It can cause a child to become very anxious whenever something in the environment, such as a sight, smell, or sound, triggers a memory of prior trauma. A child may have tremendous difficulty paying attention and concentrating. They may start doing poorly in school. Amy may have nightmares about her trauma. She may avoid certain situations that remind her of her past. She may become emotionally numb and dissociate from her surroundings when she is anxious. Adolescents who have had major trauma frequently develop high-risk behaviors such as drug or alcohol use, to numb emotional pain, or running away from home to escape trauma or anxiety-producing situations. Children and teens may become very depressed and withdrawn, may even try to harm themselves. Remember part 1. Understanding how trauma impacts a child allows us to respond sensitively to behavior or statements that may seem odd or inappropriate. For example, Instead of responding to Amy's belligerence with open hostility, instead of meeting her rejection of us with reciprocal rejection, we can take a step back, understand why Amy may be behaving the way she is, and respond with compassion, openness, and acceptance. We can strive to build trust with her, remaining non-judgmental and accepting her perspective rather than demanding she comply with our ideas of how she should behave. Let's think for a minute about bias and discrimination. When working with labor or sex trafficked children, a variety of different biases may come into play. We all have biases, and if we do not recognize and manage them, they can lead us to treat trafficked children badly, disrespect them, ignore important aspects of their case that might challenge our biases, misinterpret information, or jump to erroneous conclusions. Do you think it likely that authorities working with her have biases against her regarding her low socioeconomic status, low caste, rural background, female gender, her perceived status as tarnished as a woman, that is, she is no longer a virgin, she may have faced additional bias for being a foreigner being involved in prostitution? If Amy had been born and raised in Nepal. Trauma-informed care is also rights-based. It honors the basic right of all people to be treated with respect and dignity and without bias or any discrimination of any kind. Do you think Amy or Nakul were treated with respect by their abusers? Almost certainly they did not. And it is very likely that both children have very low self-esteem and feel unworthy of respect. We need to make every effort to build that self-esteem and self-worth by demonstrating respect in everything we do. An important human right encompassed with the trauma-informed approach is the right of the traumatized child to obtain information in a way they can understand and to have a voice in what happens to them and everything we want to do and why we want to do it. We need to ask the child if they have any questions, and very importantly, whenever feasible, we need to obtain permission from the child before proceeding. Let's take an example. There is one additional component of trauma-informed care to discuss. This approach heavily emphasizes the child's strengths and resilience. It recognizes that a traumatized child is much more than a victim. Nakul and Amy have been severely exploited. It is not likely that they see themselves as strong, resilient, and in control of their lives. We need to help them regain self-assurance and self-agency. You can call attention to the strength they have shown in living through the trauma and surviving a dangerous situation. Emphasize the creativity and resourcefulness they demonstrated in finding ways to get by in very harsh, challenging circumstances. You can offer choices whenever possible. Would you like to sit in this chair or that one? Would you like something to eat or drink? Encourage the child to ask questions and voice their concerns. Sometimes, children who have been through experiences like yours have concerns and worries. For example, they may have questions about how their bodies might have changed, or may worry about what others may say or do. Do you have any concerns you'd like to talk to me about?
So that brings me to the end of the frame of reference that I wanted to share with you. In a webinar of an hour and a half, we can only give you a frame of reference. Needless to say, trauma-informed care is a nuanced approach. It calls, of course, for certain skills, but I think if there is a basic orientation and sensitivity to what it actually means, then it is quite easy to practice, even in the context of pediatric, conventional pediatric practice. With this, I'm happy to address any issues that you may want to ask me. You please feel free to put on chat anything that you want, or you can unmute and speak. I'm also putting on chat the link to our work in Samvad. You're all very familiar with what I often say. Samvad, the website is a public domain free access website because Samvad does not believe in copyright. This will resonate very well with people from Kerala. We are a copy left organization. So please use it, translate it, send it to whoever you want. All you need to do is acknowledge us. So that's www.nimhanschildprotect.in. And there's a lot of stuff that you can use here. We have several modules on trauma, and trauma-informed care that you can practice from there. You can pick up
Yes.
from there.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Shekharji, for a wonderful presentation. My concept of bringing this topic for this program is that we have to at least you sensitize that this is something which we have to, every pediatrician, not for a trauma. I think that it will change your mindset to, even if in your as you said, in the normal pediatric practice, we have to have a trauma-informed mindset. I put it as a trauma-informed care of a trauma-informed mindset, so that you acknowledge the problem of the child, acknowledge what is happened to the child, and we have to conceive that this is not a simple problem and it is going to affect and produce long-term influences on the child. So this is a
Right.
point where as pediatricians we have to do. I think the session is open for discussion. If there is nothing in the chat box, you can open your video and ask your questions. People, either people didn't understand or they understood everything. Is that the case?
No,
Good evening, sir.
Yeah,
Good
please go
evening,
ahead.
Jayesh.
No,
Tell me.
whenever sir class is always magic. How many times you listen, you will get a new point. Sir,
Yeah, please go ahead.
యా సార్, అంటే ఒకటి మీరు మీ క్లాస్లో ఎన్ని అటెండ్ అయినా ప్రతి క్లాసు కొత్తగా అనిపిస్తుంటుంది మాకు. అంటే ఇప్పుడు యాక్చువల్గా ఆల్రెడీ ట్రోమాలో ఉన్న చిల్డ్రన్ ని హౌ వీ కెన్ మేక్ దెమ్ టు బ్రింగ్ బ్యాక్. As I told you, sir, I work with the Child Welfare Committee. We used to see so many cases like, it's not like folkso cases, folkso love cases. It's like, adult, I mean, because of this after COVID, this Instagrams and Facebook connections are becoming more long distance relations maintaining. So how we can make them to bring back them psychologically?
There are two aspects to the issue that you're raising, and I want to deal with them separately. Friends, every year, the Honorable Supreme Court of India organizes a consultation in the premises of the Supreme Court. This is the Juvenile Justice and Child Welfare Committee of the Honorable Supreme Court. Last year, this consultation started with the presentation of a report carried out by an organization, but even the Honorable Chief Justice's address was on the issue of consenting adolescent relationships. And the whole viewpoint was, let us not criminalize consenting adolescent relationships. So to understand the difference in dynamics between coercion and abuse on the one hand, and between consenting adolescent relationships, and you put it in the frame of reference of POCSO and how this plays out, 17-year-old boy, 16-year-old girl are genuinely in love. Because of fear of family, of religious caste, community issues, they decide to run away. First, a missing complaints person is lodged. A month later, they are found, by which time they have already engaged in physical intimacy. And then a kidnapping and rape charge is levied against the boy. There was no coercion on part of the boy. In fact, many times the boys plead with the girl to say, it's a question of just 2 years. You'll be 18, I'll also be adult, then we can take a decision. But the coercion sometimes, occurs even from, but then because of family pressures and other forces that come to be, the boy gets vilified. And so people have taken a position to be a little nuanced in the way that you look at the whole issue of emerging adolescent sexuality, to look at a rights-based approach to adolescent sexuality. Having said that, the frame of reference for a right-based approach is happy, healthy, safe, and responsible sexuality. All four parameters have to be satisfied. That's one part of it. The second part, coming to a situation where we are not talking about consenting adolescent relationships, social media, and all of that, but we are talking about a situation where a child has actually endured and experienced trauma, and how do you really help the child come out of the trauma? See, first of all, in our analysis, we need to understand whether the trauma was a one-off event or whether it was a multiple event that spanned time and space. Let's take the case of child sexual abuse. A child abused once by one person, known or unknown, means one thing. If you look at the Muzaffarpur case, childcare institution, 47 girls systematically abused over a 3-year period by multiple men, known and unknown. It's a completely different history. But even there, it doesn't follow a logical pattern of trauma impact. Why is it that for the same experience, two people respond differently? Does it depend on temperament and personality or inherent resilience? Does it depend on supportive family responses? Does it depend on immediate provision of trauma-informed care? A primary principle is the same for all health conditions. The earlier you intervene in a health condition, the better is the outcome, whether it is diabetes, whether it is an injury, or whether it is trauma. So, one of the principles that we use in any trauma work is an event has occurred. 40 children in a bus, it has met with an accident. Some children have died, some are seriously injured, some have survived without any injuries or minor injuries. How do you deal with this? Debriefing is necessary. Then we get into the trauma-informed care, and we look at the meaning that the child makes of the experience. So abuse always goes through a cycle starting with confusion. What is happening? Is this right? Is it only me? Why is this being done? Am I doing something to... Confusion then comes to self-estrangement. I feel a little different. I'm not all right. That leads to entrapment. I cannot go out. I don't want to meet people. I feel shameful. That leads to poor coping mechanisms, and then to poor survival skills, and then the cycle repeats. In order to assist, the confusion needs to be changed to clarity. Not your fault. What happened to you was abuse. Some people, target vulnerable people. If it wasn't you, somebody else may have been targeted. So it was not that, you was, specially sort of selected to be a target. So there are exploitative people. Confusion to clarity. Self-estrangement to self-empowerment. You're remarkable for having survived, just as we do in trauma-informed care, to build on strengths. And then to look at coping skills. And then a reframing of identity, which is that I am not defined by my abuse and trauma. My abuse and trauma is real. Nobody's trivializing it, minimizing it, or saying, forget it, time is a great healer. And those are all cliches. Time is not a great healer. But if you minimize the importance that trauma occupies in the sensuous, the consciousness, and the identity of a person, and you fill it with many other experiences, its relative impact recedes. It is still there, but it recedes. But you're defined by many other things that happen to you. That's the way the trauma work is done.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think one more last question. How, as we are dealing with trauma, what is the self-care methods we need to follow?
Kind words of affirmation. Is there anything else that anyone would like to basically share from your own clinical and experience? I do see an issue of chat. Let me go through this. Most of the POXO cases is useful. I must draw your attention to one of the things that Dr. Ashok said when he was very kindly introducing me. Friends, I was on the drafting committee of POXO before it came into existence in 2012. The committee was set up under the chair of Dr. Shanta Sinha, who was then the chairperson of the National Commission of Protection of Child Rights. Dr. Shanta Sinha, I'm sure my friends from Andhra and Telangana would be familiar with her. She started the MV Foundation in Hyderabad, where she rescued millions of children from child labor, put them into Brit schools, and basically rehabilitated and changed their lives. Magsaysay Award winner, Padma Shri. Absolutely remarkable, and a child rights advocate to the core of her being. And she once said, if there is any culture or any ritual that is inimical to children, that is against children, change it. We don't want any such practice or culture which is against the best interest of children. Now, when we drafted POXO, we were aware that there are certain limitations of how the trial process would take place. And you know that the kind of pendency in terms of judgment, though there is a Supreme Court order to fast track cases, that it shouldn't take inordinately long. It has set up more special courts. The problem is how child-friendly are justice systems in India. Now, please understand, you've heard the English saying, one swallow does not a summer make. Similarly, one purple sofa does not a child-friendly court make. So just by putting a colored sofa and Donald Duck pictures on the wall, that's not child-friendly because your processes are as legalistic. And what happens, therefore, is there is secondary victimization and re-traumatization that occurs. Remember the poem that I read?
Yeah.
It's like I asked you for confidentiality, and of course now the POXO rules stipulate a certain child protective trial procedures. But even then, the reason why this kind of compromising takes place or cases drop are either because of financial considerations, or it's because of the tiredness and fatigue of families to go through these complex and long processes. That's why Samvad, in its four verticals, in core mental health, in child protection, in education, but in policy and law, we work extensively with the judiciary. Dr. Ashok, we were recently in the Kerala Judicial Academy working with the special court judges. And we also worked with the chief judicial magistrates for children in conflict with law. So we work extensively with POXO court and special court judges to get them to understand what mental health and developmental implications of evidence gathering and court processes are. That's the way that we are approaching it. And Samvad's work is therefore transdisciplinary. Not enough for a child mental health professional to diagnose PTSD. I have to know the law. When does a case come to be known? FIR is lodged. 161 statement is taken, 164 statement is taken, charges are framed, charge sheet is filed, trial, direct, cross, argument, and then judgment, sentencing if guilty, acquittal if not. So I need to know all this. Not enough for a judge to listen to testimony and adjudicate. Who's the child? 3 years old? 6 years old with hearing and speech problem? 9-year-old with intellectual disability? 14-year-old with severe PTSD. So a judge has to know developmental and mental health implications of evidence gathering to make these court processes. So two things, last things. There is a fantastic organization in South Africa called the Child Witness Institute. They work only with child witnesses and child victim witnesses. We have done a series of 4 programs with them, 90-minute 4 sessions, which is in our YouTube channel, Samvad Nimans, Samvad, Samvad Nimans. If you go to YouTube and put Samvad Nimans, you'll see. So Karen Hollerly and Karen Muller, Child Witness Institute, 4-part serial with the Child Witness Institute. We also have a 90-minute program on 10 years of POCSO. Justice Madan Lokur, who retired as Judge Supreme Court of India and was the chairperson of the JJ committee, moderated the session. And 4 members of the drafting committee were there, including me. And we've spoken about what progress have we made in these 12 years since POCSO came to being, all of which really addresses the kind of question that has been raised on why cases are compromised and how, therefore, can you make these processes more useful.
Thank you, Dr. Sekhar, for the nice presentation. And I think if you start talking and if you are listening to you, it will not end today. Yeah, that is the way we communicate in the world. And I think before we conclude, we have Dr. Riaz. He is the incoming president of IAP Kerala. And I wanted to introduce him to you, sir, because under his leadership next year we have to do a lot of programs related to mental health as well as the trauma-informed care in Kerala. And we wanted your help for all these things. Now I request Riaz to say a few words.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity. And I joined a little late, but I was listening so fondly from Seshadri, sir, because it's the topic he discussed is something new for a pediatrician like me, because we do see children with traumatic experiences, but how much we know about how to identify the trauma, how to care for them, how to handhold them are actually real questions. And we know during the pediatric training, we are also very less taught about all these things. And regarding IAP Kerala, since 2020, we are actually having a strong team for child rights activities headed by our Ashok Kumar sir. And we do conduct programs and we try to equip our members in all these aspects. I think with your help and guidance, I think this year we can do one of the best programs which we have ever did. And we will be getting your help again and again. Kindly guide us through. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I would be honored to, Dr. Riaz.
Well, as what you said, when it is not only hand-holding or the judges should know. We should also know that it is from our side also. We should train or help the children to when the court cases come, and we should also be properly involved in the cases. What I've said that they may be better. Talking with you also, when your presence is there, probably you may get a better opportunity. I think that point also has to be looked into in the future POCSO discussions.
Right. There is a quick query from Dr. Aditi on trauma. Dr. Aditi, thank you very much again for your affirmation. TIS Mumbai runs a course on trauma-informed care, 2 courses. One is a shorter course and one is a larger course. It is run by a faculty there called Sukanya Ray. Also, Dr. Aditi, I don't know where you're based, but just in the event that you're based in Kolkata, I'm doing a session in the Institute of Psychiatry on 22nd of this month. It's a whole day program on with the Institute of Psychiatry and UNICEF. So if you could contact Institute of Psychiatry, I'm sure they will be happy to have you there. I'll be speaking a lot on systems, not so much on trauma-informed care, in case you happen to be in Kolkata. Otherwise, do look up the TIS Mumbai Trauma-Informed Care course. It's an online course. And they run a shorter one, which is like a certificate course, and a larger one, which is a diploma course. Sukanya Ray is the person who curates it. Okay, Aditi, you are from Kolkata. तो तारपर तो आपने आशबिन 22nd Institute of Secretary. I land on 21st night, and 22nd and 23rd I actually have a program on autism. There's a huge autism parents conclave where I'm speaking, addressing parents. So आपने आशबिन Aditi, Dr. Aditi.
Dr. Sekhar, how many languages you can speak?
7.
Yeah, that's nice. Almost our major languages in India.
Yeah.
In fact, we talk in Malayalam whenever we meet. That is. Yeah. That's what we talk in Malayalam in between. I think, Riaz, can we wind up the session? This is almost, we have almost 10:21.
Yes, sir. We have a recording, live streaming for this one.
Yeah, live streaming is going on. That is why I just wanted to tell Dr. Sekhar, this is going in YouTube also. So many people may not join in the
on
online.
Which channel?
YouTube channel. We have an IAP Kerala YouTube channel, sir.
Oh, IAP Kerala.
Right.
Yeah.
It is there.
So this will be viewed again also. So
Right.
So thank you, Dr. Seshadri, for being with us for this evening and helping, giving a different outlook or different picture from our usual pediatric sessions. And on behalf of IAP Kerala, as well as on my personal behalf, I thank you for your kind presence. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Riaz, for being with us for this program. And I thank all. I think we had almost 35 participants. They might have left when your talk is over.
Right.
It is a little too late. I also know that it's 10:20. It's a little too much on Saturday night. But anyway, we had a nice program. So thank you all for joining this wonderful session. Thank you all and good night. Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.